Hey everyone, it's Matt again, and today we're going to show you how to rebuild this GM speedometer cable. So the customer brought in this cable, and it is a little broken, a little grimy, and needs replacing. But on top of that, he also needs it a little longer, which is what the reason for this little length of rope is. So we need to make sure it comes out to about yay long. And same standard GM size, 104 square on both ends, a 7/8 knot on one side, a 5/8 on the other. And he also needs us to reuse his grommet. So what we'll do is get that started and we will go from there. So before we get started, what we're going to need to do, like always, is make sure we have everything we need. We have our 7/8 18 nut right here and the ferrule that will go on it for a 7/8 onto a .330 casing. Then on the other side we have our 5/8 nut and the same 5/8 ferrule that'll go onto the same housing. And then we have our little brass collar, which will hang the inner core through, which will hang it on this side so the cable doesn't just swing on through while we're using it. So the first thing we need to do is cut our outer casing and then get that all cleaned up and then start putting all this onto the casing. So let's get started. So I realize now as I'm trying to deburr the casing here from cutting it that I forgot entirely to press record on the camera, even though I set it all up and everything. I thought I was recording, but apparently not. So, well, I guess you learn once, you do that once and you don't do it again, right? So hopefully we'll have no more of those problems. But like every other cable, you need to deburr and make sure everything is all nice and smooth so nothing interferes with the rotation of the cable. That looks good. So we'll get our ferrules mounted on and then start measuring our inner core. So with this cable, the customer wants us to reuse the grommet. So what we've done is made sure we put it on the right way, on the right side. So what we'll do is we'll build the gauge end first. That way we don't have any kind of issues in the future. But we'll get that crimped on like so, about yay deep down. And then that way we can start working on the bottom end. Like always, before you give this a good crimp, make sure your nut, and in this case your grommet, are on all in the right direction, as well as the correct depth for your ferrule and inner core, or sorry, your outer casing, and then give it a nice good crimp. And there we go. Now we'll go work on the bottom end. So with the bottom end, nut first, ferrule again. Again, you only want it about yay deep. You don't really want it interfering into the larger space here. Take your crimping pliers. And there we go. So now the outer casing is all done, and now we need to work on the inner core and get this brass collar on. And to do that, we'll need to cut the inner core to length and actually go to town on it with a swedging tool. And yeah, let's go get that going. So we have our inner core here all cut, but like I said in a couple of videos earlier, I tend to cut this a lot longer than I need because I'd rather trim it down than have to start over again from scratch. So what we're going to do is square this 130 core down to 104 square on both ends, and then we're going to pick whichever side we want, doesn't really matter, and crimp on our collar so that side ends up being the gauge end. So we will get that started. So I'm going to show you how to do that again. So to get these started, what we need to do is pass the inner core through the green rough die first, and then pass it through the red fine die last, because the green die, what it will do is punch in a rough square shape into it, but it's not quite as fine as it needs to be, so it passes through the second die with much higher tolerance, and that gives us those nice hard stiff corners and allows it to connect into gauges and transmissions without any kind of problems in the future. So let's get that started using the fine die. So now that we have this all swedged down, and because I like making everything so much longer, I do have a lot more room to work with. So I've already kind of test fitted it and everything. So it's crimped down to about here, or sorry, squared up to down here. So I squared all of this. But what I'm going to do is slide it up a bit from there, about a ½ inch or so. That way we just trim down the ends, and that way we make sure everything fits. So we'll get that crimped on, trim everything down, and then this is ready for grease. So that's all crimped down now. It's not going to go anywhere. So we'll put this into the casing and trim it up and go from there. So we'll run the inner core into the cable. And like I said, I fit this in way too long, but that's where it's going to bottom out. And if we bring the bottom end here, still a smidgen too long, and that's totally fine. So what we're going to do is trim this up just a smidge. We're going to trim this up probably an inch or so, and then round off the ends to give it a little bit of a point, and then it's time for grease. So we'll do the top end first with the gauge and the 5/8 nut. So what you want the length to roughly end up being is about yay much out when the nut is fully extended. So we're going to trim out to about here, and then once we put the tip on, it'll take the length down a little bit. So we'll snip that down like so. Yeah, it's still a smidgen too long, but what we're going to do is fix that on the grinder when we get the tip down. Get the other side here, make sure the one side's bottomed out. And on this side, we only need to cut off about, yeah, that much. So really not that much at all. Sometimes what I do is actually measure it like this, pull it out of the cable entirely, and then do my cutting. Sometimes it just works out better if you do it that way, but you know, once you've been doing this for 20 years like I have, you kind of get a flow going with what works best for you. So we'll get these chips rounded off and then grease it up. Yeah, now that we got everything all trimmed up and nice point put on there, we're going to grease it up, slide it in, give it a little test turn, and then we will have this ready for our customer. Oop, it fell out of the vise. Yeah, sometimes you got to make sure this doesn't want to move too much. And be careful to if you put too much grease on it, you're going to have a lot of this. Just because the sizing of the cable, it's just the tolerance for things is a lot lower, so sometimes the greasing can get a little messy, and it's one of my least favorite parts, but hey, what can you do? And that there is how we redid this GM speedometer cable and reused the customer's existing grommet. If you have any questions or comments, just leave them in the comments section below. As always, like and subscribe. And until next week with our new video, have a good one.